Fall is my absolute favorite time of year. I'm excited that the weather is cooling off, and I've already started wearing my coziest sweaters. My heather gray Mongolian cashmere sweater from Quince was the first thing I pulled out of my closet as soon as the weather turned cooler. It's soft and warm and so stylish. I wore it all the time last winter and it's still in great shape. $50 is an unbelievable price for a cashmere sweater like this. Quince delivers luxury quality pieces at half the price of similar brands because they cut out the middleman and partner directly with top-tier ethical factories. Layers are the name of the game this time of year. If you need a new winter coat, they have beautiful coats and jackets. They have everything you need for your wardrobe this fall, as well as beautiful linens, bags, and home decor. Pretty much everything you need for your home and wardrobe. Find your fall staples at Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
The parenting traps is a phrase that I created after noticing common patterns, behavioral patterns that I see in allergy parents, myself included. The certainty trap is really, as you said, rooted in this desire to control everyone and everything in service of keeping our child safe. And so, of course, we want to control any variables and outcomes so that our kid's safe, but it's not a realistic goal to really work towards because we can't control everyone and everything.
That was Tamara Hubbard on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Mac Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, listeners. We are going back to our old ways of doing things today, and I am here with Yael to introduce this episode, and there's a really good reason for that. So I'm going to let Yael take it away since she just listened to this episode and has fresh thoughts.
So on the face of it, this episode is about parenting a child who has food allergies, but I think it becomes clear quite quickly that the messages are far broader than that. And really the message is that anxiety is not a bad thing, right? That often anxiety is an emotion and internal experience that comes up when there's something that we need to be concerned about. And in the case of parenting, there's lots of things to be concerned about. Whether or not you have a child with an allergy, there are always things to monitor. And anxiety kind of provides us with information of like, ooh, wake up, pay attention. There's something concerning here. But the problem is when anxiety becomes so omnipresent and so likely to dictate all of your responses and that we don't moderate it or get curious about it. And so I think that a lot of the ways of thinking about the role of anxiety in parenting a child with food allergy are, on the one hand, very specific, and on the other hand, so general, whether it's parenting or outside of parenting, in terms of how we manage this emotion that is a universal emotion for all humans.
And not just managing anxiety, but the key element of that anxiety, which is uncertainty. And that is a huge theme that Tamara and I get into, is managing uncertainty as part of that anxiety. And I think when we're talking about our modern world of parenting, it is replete with uncertainty at so many levels. And so I mean, parents who are raising kids with medical conditions that could be life-threatening, such as food allergies, are experiencing this uncertainty and fear and anxiety in a very visceral way, which we absolutely acknowledge. And there are other parenting situations where there are other types of very real uncertainty, including even with the very low statistical rates, school shootings. Like, we send our kids to school every day knowing that there could be a headline.
And as I was listening to your conversation with Tamara, I was actually thinking a lot about the conversation that I had early on in the podcast history with Kim Brooks, who wrote this terrific book called Small Animals, Parenting in the Age of Fear, as well as my conversation with Lenore Skenazy, who I had a conversation with about her book, Free Range Kids. And I think in both of those cases, they talk about the cognitive biases that we have in assessing risk, that these very low probability events that are high drama or that have happened recently, even if they don't happen very often, tend to play prominently. But the lower drama, higher statistical probability, like our kids not being active enough or watching too much screens that is unhealthy, like these kinds of things don't catch our attention as much. And the same thing I think you and Tamara talk about with food allergies, that we sort of get so hooked on this fear of this outcome that is possible, certainly when your kid has a food allergy, but actually the likelihood is something that we may not know, or that we may be able to get better information about from a specialized physician that can help us maybe recalibrate the risk that we're assessing.
Mm-hmm. That's what I loved about this conversation, is I think Tamara does a really nice job of acknowledging the real fears and the very understandable anxiety around raising kids with food allergies, and, as we're saying, other areas of parenting, and giving very effective strategies to hold that anxiety, acknowledge it, regard it, and move into a full life.
Yeah.
So I think this really benefits everyone, whether or not you have a child with a food allergy.
I agree.
Thanks, Yael. I am so excited today to have this guest on to talk about raising kids with food allergies. Tamara Hubbard has more than 20 years of experience as a marriage and family therapist, and she's a licensed clinical professional counselor helping women and parents of children with food allergies find their just right balance between feeling overwhelmed and living fully. Tamara created the Food Allergy Counselor in 2018 to fill a much-needed resource gap by offering evidence-based food allergy anxiety management, mindset, and parenting content. She also founded the Academy of Food Allergy Counseling and its Food Allergy Counseling Directory, and currently serves as its chief advisor. An active allied health member of professional allergy and immunology organizations, Tamara is a national speaker and holds advisory roles within the allergy community. Finally, her first book, May Contain Anxiety: Managing the Overwhelm of Parenting Children with Food Allergies, with Johns Hopkins University Press, just came out the week this episode airs. Tamara, welcome back to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you gals.
So, they're really, reading that bio, there is no one more qualified to write this book.
Sure sounds like it, right?
Yeah, that sounded really good all put together. I mean,
Yeah.
You clearly have the expertise, and you were on our podcast a few years ago to talk to Jill about living a meaningful life with food allergies, and that's episode 222. But you now have this book for parents. And I will say that as I was reading, I was thinking about how so much of this guidance around parenting a child with food allergies could apply to many situations where parents have a child with any type of vulnerability that would increase a parent's anxiety about keeping them safe. So we're going to be talking about food allergies, but I do think listeners will get a lot out of this, even if they don't have a child specifically with food allergies.
Totally agree. And a lot of the content in there is food allergy focused, but allergic diseases, and then, like you said, other health diagnoses, chronic conditions, mental health, physical health. Parenting a child with a diagnosis of any kind is stressful and hard and overwhelming.
Well, and it adds another layer to the parental drive to keep our child safe.
Absolutely.
If there's that extra intrinsic threat, in addition to the threats already existing in our modern world.
Yeah, agree. 100% agree.
So a defining feature of the experience of parenting a child with food allergies is managing unpredictability and uncertainty of threats to your child's safety, which again could apply to other situations. But in this specific context, let's start with defining the medical term allergy and talk about why a child living with a food allergy can create so much anxiety in parents.
So, food allergies specifically is when the immune system responds to a protein in a food incorrectly. And so it sees it as something bad and it starts this sort of attack mode. And so that's when different systems in the body get involved to sort of fight this invader, this intruder, which most immune systems don't recognize as a threat. And researchers are still doing tons of research to figure out, again, why the glitch happens in some and not others. I mean, that's the big question, because a lot of parents, moms in particular, often feel a lot of guilt. Did I do something wrong? Did I not do something right? And that feeling of guilt is really driving that not wanting to feel pain again in the future. So can we figure this out so that we don't make any more mistakes and cause more pain and any more reactions? But researchers have not, cracked the code, so to speak, specifically. So there is not one cause of that happening in some kids and not others. And by the way, adults have food allergies too. 1 in 10 adults, I think, is the current stat in the US. And some are adult onset, some are carried on from childhood through adulthood. So it's not just kids. But for this purpose, the parenting piece is made much more overwhelming because exactly what you said, that threat is all around, all throughout the day. I mean, food is a huge part of our lives, our need to survive. We have to eat, social experiences, school, work, all of that. So it's the body misinterpreting food proteins. And of course, there are other allergic diseases. Seasonal allergies is kind of a similar thing. There are allergic diseases like atopic dermatitis, where, the skin is involved. So it's just the body responding in a way that sees food as a threat.
Right. And I've done clinical work with kids with food allergies, and I know that something that's always underlying the family system is the fear of a fatal anaphylaxis, right? I mean, that's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
That's where I think it's different from atopic dermatitis or hay fever, right? With food allergies, and depending on the family's experience with the diagnosis, that could have been extremely scary. There's that ultimate threat.
That's the piece that makes this the most terrifying.
Right.
And again, I should mention, I am a parent of a child with a peanut allergy. He's a teenager right now, which is a tough period of development, period. And then you add this, right? And I share in the introduction chapter of the book our first experience with his first allergic reaction. And it is terrifying to see your child's body, reacting in the way that it could and does. With that said, and I think, again, this is a theme throughout the book, hopefully that you picked up on, is that our mind as a parent is likely to go to that worst case scenario. This is going to be a fatal reaction, even if my child ingests or is near a tiny amount of their allergen. With that said, the statistics show that that's not accurate. And I think that that's an important thing. Again, I never want to call anyone's fear irrational. I never use the word rational or irrational. It's not an irrational fear to worry about your child dying. It's just not. But the level of intensity of our fear can be so quality of life inhibiting.
Right.
That it's important to remember and to remind ourselves on a daily basis sometimes, especially in the beginning of allergy parenting, that an allergic reaction does not always mean an anaphylactic reaction, which is that severe reaction that could lead to death. And even an anaphylactic reaction, it doesn't always lead to death. And I can't take credit for that lovely little package saying. My colleague and friend, Dr. Dave Stukas, said it at one of his conference lectures one time. And I, of course, popped it in the book. But that's an important distinction. And it can be hard when that drive to keep our kids safe and that anxiety is high to remember that.
Well, and it reminds me of so many things we navigate in daily life. I mean, getting into the car.
Yeah.
We could have a fatal car accident.
Risks are everywhere.
Right.
It's just that this is in our faces, so to speak.
Yep.
I mean, again, you're right. We don't think, I don't, when I get in the car, think every single time I get in the car, I might die. Now, some people might because that's where the anxiety is focused.
Or they had a previously terrible car accident. Right.
And to your earlier point, in when you were asking the question, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times families fall into food allergies after their child has had an allergic reaction. And that allergic reaction is oftentimes traumatic, even if it's not an anaphylactic reaction. Seeing your child react to a food, especially if you didn't suspect a food allergy or there was no, you don't have food allergies in your family, that's terrifying. Any kind of medical incident is terrifying as a parent. So there is trauma associated with this usually.
Well, and that experience really exacerbates that sense of unpredictability.
Yep.
Because everything was fine. You had no indications. And then there was this terrible few seconds.
Right.
Where you're watching your child and it's really scary, few minutes, few hours. And so then that creates that feeling of this could happen when everything feels fine.
Yeah. And even to take that further, a lot of times initially, that reaction, we may be uncertain about what caused it until we go to a doctor who maybe refers to a board-certified allergist who then, we figure it out piece by piece of what it was so that we now know, oh, okay, they're allergic to this. Or even if we know they're allergen and, we just can't figure out how it was in that meal or that item, that food, right? So even when we know what we know, there's still uncertainty. And that is hard to live with on a daily basis.
Well, I think this is the purpose of your book, right? Because the level of uncertainty is bottomless.
Yep.
Because you can never guarantee safety.
Right.
And so your book comes in as a resource for parents who, I'm sure it's very rare to find a food allergy parent without anxiety. I'm not talking like clinical levels necessarily, but like some, right?
Yeah. And again, I tell everybody anxiety as an emotion isn't bad. As a whole, do we like how it feels? No. I'm a therapist and I don't like it. But high levels of anxiety or clinical levels of anxiety is where it's very problematic, or I term it unhelpful anxiety versus helpful anxiety, which on an everyday basis, it's what makes us look both ways when we cross the street, right? Or that, makes us pay attention when we're driving. With food allergies, it's what helps us prepare and plan, but we can go into overdrive because of this fear of the unknown and the uncertainties. And then it becomes more of a clinical level that is now causing problems in our lives rather than being helpful.
Yeah, I recently did an episode with therapist Noelle McWard-Aquino about anxiety. And we talked about how we all experience anxiety. It's an emotion.
Yeah.
It's a human experience, but it's really looking at when does it cross into interfering with our lives. And her book's framework is about 3 common roots of anxiety. And one of these roots is control.
Yep.
And this is such a big one in the food allergy parenting world, right? You talk about control-seeking behaviors in the context of one of the parenting traps that you outline, that you named the certainty trap. And since I'm sure many parents can relate to this, will you describe the certainty trap and some common control-seeking behaviors?
Yeah. The parenting traps is a phrase that I created after noticing common patterns, behavioral patterns that I see in allergy parents, myself included, because remember, I'm an allergy parent. The certainty trap is really, as you said, rooted in this desire to control everyone and everything in service of keeping our child safe. And so at the core, it's totally understandable. Of course, we want to control any variables and outcomes so that our kid's safe and we avoid pain and all of that, and our child doesn't feel pain. But it's not a realistic goal to really work towards because we can't control everyone and everything. So we might see ourselves in that trap or recognize we're in that trap when we are constantly trying to research and try to find all of the answers, right? We have to seek that bit of certainty that tells us exactly what caused the diagnosis, how to avoid any kind of risk, how to stay 100% risk-free, which isn't possible, as we've said. And that may then lead to behaviors like unwillingness to let anyone else watch the child, including the co-parent or spouse or partner, babysitters, or anything like that. That then becomes problematic. I mean, we can kind of ride that for a little bit, and it won't maybe cause big problems. It might cause tension and marital conflict and things like that. But then when the child gets to preschool age or has to go to daycare, now we've got this big leap, right? And we've been trying to control or telling ourselves that we've successfully been controlling everything, when the reality is we haven't. We've just sort of been making our world and our child's world smaller to not have to deal with things.
Not to mention the cumulative stress of being the only person you feel like is trustworthy enough to be with your child.
Well, that's one of the other traps, is a burnout trap, right? Because we do believe we're the only one. And that there's another phrase that I created that I share in the book called the allergy expert parent. And, a lot of times it's the mom or the parent who is doing the day-to-day. So if a dad is doing day-to-day. And so they're the ones who are learning the ins and outs and who are, making all the decisions for the most part during the day. And they then just, if they're really anxious, tell themselves, I'm the only one who can keep my child safe. And so, they're all intertwined, these traps. And oftentimes we're in more than one at a time. But it becomes problematic for a lot of reasons: for the parent burning out and being exhausted, for conflict in the marriages, for impacts on other relationships, family relationships, friendship relationships, because we're not going out and doing things. And then for the child, there's implications too. I mean, that's really what a lot of this book comes back to is, hey, moms, dads, parents, caregivers, we've got to kind of work through our own stuff, as hard as this is and as impossible as it might feel, so that we don't impede our child's growth and development. Because at the end of the day, this kiddo has to launch with food allergies and know how to keep themselves safe. That's
right.
Our goal.
And the unintentional messaging is that they're not safe in the world. They're not safe if they're not with you.
Yep.
Which that is not sustainable for healthy growth and development.
No.
As much as it's understandable what the drive is, it's not helpful. Like you were saying, there's helpful and unhelpful anxiety.
Right. And our anxiety may say that is the truth, that our child is not safe without being with us, or me not being there to intervene or control. That's what our anxiety tries to tell us is what's keeping our child safe. And my argument in this book is that's not keeping your child safe. When it's at that high level of anxiety where our world is smaller, we're avoiding things, we're not paying attention to how it's impacting our child. We're really just sort of reassurance seeking through control efforts to calm our own anxiety. And our anxiety is leading us astray.
It's a myth. It's a false story. Yeah. Well, and I loved this quote from this section of your book because it's very symbiotic with my work in autonomy supportive parenting.
And by the way, I quoted you in this book. I pulled some stuff from your book.
I put a happy face in the the margins. Like, there I am. So you said focusing on influencing rather than controlling outcomes is crucial when making the transition from control seeking to skill building. So you're not just describing the problematic trends and behaviors. You are charting a path out, away from those problematic behaviors into skill building.
Yeah. We often forget as allergy parents that that is something we are trying to do. Mm-hmm. When we're totally or wholly or almost completely focused on controlling for safety purposes, again, very understandable, we can forget how important it is to help our kids build skills for allergy management. help our co-parents build skills for allergy management, the grandparents, babysitters, because we're so busy doing everything on our own. And so again, that's good. That's the control piece. We want to shift to influencing outcomes. And how we do that is by focusing on the skill building and by educating others. And unfortunately, that also involves stepping outside of the comfort zone. Doesn't have to be big leaps, but baby steps where we're allowing others to get involved in caring for our child. If they've proven that they're trustworthy, of course, we're not just going to say anyone and everyone can care for our child. But in order to shift from control to influencing and skill building, we do have to step outside of our comfort zone. And that is the hardest part of all of this, is that we actually have to do things that are hard, that we don't like, and that our anxiety alarm bells may go off loud and go, not safe, don't do it. Because simply put, it's different than how we used to do it. And again, if we've convinced ourselves that controlling everything all the time is what keeps our child safe, and it probably does, but it also causes problems that, to your point, can't be sustained. I mean, it's just not sustainable. And if it is, it usually causes a lot of developmental issues for our child, for ourselves, for our relationships.
Right. Well, I think this leads really well into another core anxiety behavior that you've touched on and is very easy to develop as a food allergy parent of any vulnerable child, and that is avoidance. Mm-hmm. So I love this question that you pose to parents who fall into what you call the over-avoidance trap of avoiding any potential threats to their child's safety by heavily restricting activities and experiences. You ask, how exactly do you determine what's safe enough? Mm-hmm. And I love that question because it's really startling of when is it enough, right? When does it feel safe enough?
Yeah, it's a huge question. Right. And I can imagine parents reading that going, I don't know. How do I figure that out? That's where I don't know. And so what I share in the book and what I'll share anytime I'm posting online or talking with people is that if we let anxiety decide what's safe enough or not safe for our food allergic child or family, we will likely avoid more than we need to beyond what's medically necessary, is how I say it. And that leads into that over-avoidance trap. And so what's important is if you can figure that out yourself, like you understand what your risk tolerance levels are, you understand your child's food allergy enough that you are like, okay, I figured out that we feel safe here and that's safe enough, right? Again, going back to that unfortunate reality of like nothing is 100% risk-free, and risk is on a spectrum. It's not all safe or all unsafe, but that's what our mind tells us. If you can figure that out on your own, great. If you're like, I don't know how to figure that out, or I'm really struggling to figure that out because things I read online make me scared to even try to go out to a restaurant or travel or take my child to the park for fear of being near their allergen, then that's when I really lead the readers into, this is a discussion to be having with your child's board certified allergist, because it's imperative to figure out what for your family, and that's different for every family, and for every allergen profile,
right,
is deemed safe enough, and not safe. But that's at the core foundation of us being able to unhook from that intense anxiety that tells us everything is unsafe and every risk is 100% risky and going to lead to death.
Right. Which, when we say it like that, clearly sounds like catastrophic thinking, right?
Yeah.
Of course, not every time you go to the park, your child's going to die. But that's essentially kind of what's happening internally, even if it's not conscious, making those connections explicitly. It's kind of underlying the avoidance behaviors.
I don't think I put this in the book, but another metaphor, us ACT-based therapists like our metaphors. Another metaphor I use to kind of describe that, sort of that connection piece, that meaning making out of the anxiety, is that we can put tons of pieces of Legos together and say they fit. And then when we step back and we look at it and we go, yeah, no, that doesn't fit for the kit I'm making. Sure, I can put them together, but that doesn't make sense in the kit I'm making. It's not workable. And that's the same thing. Sure, we can say, I'm so scared that I take my child to the park and there's peanut butter smeared on the table, little bits of it, I can't see. And then they touch it, put their hand in their mouth. Could it lead to an allergic reaction? Again, we can't be 100% certain it won't. But to say, I can't take my child to the park because that will lead to an allergic reaction that then results in death. I mean, those are two Lego pieces that may not need to be put together. Again, conversation with the allergist. I'm very careful in this book, and I got reviews from allergists who were appreciative of this, to not step over into medical guidance. I am a licensed therapist that is outside of my scope of work. So I do my best to guide people to have useful conversations with their healthcare team to get the information they need to unhook from this anxiety and overwhelm.
So I think that is the perfect segue to getting into some of the strategies you recommend for parents to balance safety while not going into over avoidance mode. So for example, if you have a parent who doesn't want to take their 3-year-old to the park due to fears of them coming into contact with peanut butter, what strategies would you counsel that parent?
First, I'm going to start with validation, right? Because it's completely understanding that they are fearing that experience. And then we're going to jump into, first of all, we'd also identify that that's a parenting trap, right? Like the over avoidance. I would do some basic education on anxiety and what anxiety does to our actions. It pushes us to fear things and avoid things. I also often early on in working with parents who come in with these fears, which is typically why they reach out to me, will ask if they have the information from their allergist and know how to assess, is this safe enough, or is this their anxiety telling them it's not safe? So we jump into that narrative. Is this the story that your mind is creating because it's afraid of risk, and understandably so? Or is this based on your child's allergic profile? You've been guided to not and advised to not go to parks because they're that sensitive. And then when we know that it should be safe enough for them to take their child to the park, that's when we jump into values work, right? And we jump into, okay, as an allergy parent, we are really focused on the value of safety, and we always will be. That's just not negotiable. But what other values? So we start talking about what else is important that you want your child to learn, or you show them and model for them. Things like socialization and connection with other kids, and adventure, and wanting to be curious, and seeking out fun things on the playground. And so then we take sort of baby steps towards, okay, what can you remind yourself? What kind of self-talk can we embed in your mind? Because it's going to be uncomfortable and hard to go to that park after you've told yourself that it's not safe, you can't do it. And then I help the mom take actionable steps towards actually getting to the park, and then seeing, hey, what my mind was telling me was going to happen, is that what happened? No. I get into more total, strategies in the book, but that is sort of the arc of the work that I would do. And within that, again, we also start talking about what we were talking about earlier, this need to focus on multiple developmental processes during allergy parenting, the child's development, the parent's development, because as a parent, as the child's growing, we need to change our role. And then the allergy management or skill building development too. And so we're going to bring in all of those things, as I call North Stars, to help parents unhook enough from the anxiety to do the uncomfortable things once we've deemed it safe enough to help improve their quality of life for themselves and their child.
Well, and in my work with anxiety, I know that one of the key interventions is helping the client focus on, okay, so if that feared event occurs, can you handle it?
Yeah.
And
we
how?
Talk a lot. Yeah.
Right.
What would you do? I often will flip. So this is a specific strategy that I share in the book, and I share all the time. Changing that what if thinking to if then.
Yep.
Right. So we could, and we often do, get stuck in what if thinking. What if this happens? And then what if that happens? And next thing we know, we're convinced that going to the park is our child's going to die. And that's an extreme example. We do it on less extreme examples throughout the day, every day. But what I encourage people to do is to change that what if to an if then. That goes from that passive sort of rumination thinking, catastrophizing, to empowering, action-focused strategies. Well, if I notice an allergic reaction or I notice hives after they've been, on the swing, then I'm going to look at our emergency action plan and follow it.
Right.
If that happens and I feel like I'm not sure what to do, we're going to call our doctor. We're going to call 911, right? So it's an if then. If that happens, and we can't guarantee, again, certainty, we can't guarantee nothing will ever happen. So then let's make sure you're prepared for what you'll do in the event that does happen.
Right. And I think building that confidence in one's internal capacity and abilities is exactly what then counters and offsets the anxiety. So both aren't going to exist like at high levels, right? So it's sort of that you're putting more energy and focus into the belief in yourself and confidence in yourself. And then the anxiety is it just fades because they don't work together. They don't exist together.
We want to go into action mode when there's an emergency.
Yep.
And that's the big feared thing, right? But that anticipatory anxiety prior to any experience can make us believe that we're not going to be able to take action when we need to. We will, because it's hardwired in us as parents, right? It's a safety thing, and we are very focused on safety. But so even going through that prior, to an event, so for instance, a lot of times I'll work with parents on preparing for oral food challenges. And oral food challenges are what board certified allergists will do if they suspect maybe a child has outgrown an allergen or they want to see what the threshold is. They don't do that with everybody and every allergen. There are levels where they're like, we're not doing a food challenge. But it is terrifying as a parent to think this allergen that we've been told to avoid with all, at all costs, this allergist is not going to feed this to our child, and we're just going to be okay with it. No, you are going to have anxiety about that. That's understandable. But we talk about the what ifs, and there are a lot of what ifs that swirl in that situation. And we talk about things like, well, if that happens, you're going to ask the allergist what they're going to do. And if that happens, the allergist is there to take care of it, right? And if that happens and they do walk away having an allergic reaction and that challenge is deemed unsuccessful. I hate the pass-fail language, but I like to use it like your child can tolerate the allergen or they can't. They still can't tolerate it. Then you'll walk away with more knowledge. You'll also walk away knowing, I saw how the allergist intervened. And so I know what a mild allergic reaction might look like versus maybe a more moderate one. So there's a lot of ways we can use that if-then, sort of flipping that to more action-oriented or unhooking from the vast swirling anxiety thoughts that we have as a parent.
Yeah, those are excellent examples of applying those ideas. I think one of the most critical parts of your book that we should always be thinking about as parents, no matter what our unique challenges are, is remembering our child's development and what each stage means for how we shift our parenting approach. Yeah. And you bring up a food allergy study that introduces the Goldilocks principle, which I love. So say more about this principle and why it's so critical for food allergy parents.
Yeah, so it was termed the Goldilocks principle, but it's also been called or referred to in some research or some papers as the relaxed readiness approach. And so essentially what this talks about, I always love showing the diagram. My publisher was like, no pictures, let's just describe it. So I describe it in the book, but essentially, if you think of a bell-shaped curve, right? In the middle of that bell-shaped curve is sort of that just right approach to food allergy management. There's some anxiety, but it's anxiety that's manageable enough that you are being cautious, but not over avoidant, that you are, not being lackadaisical about it and never carrying epinephrine auto-injectors. But on either side of that bell curve, there are people who just are like, yeah, I have a food allergy, I don't care, whatever. And they're probably going to have a lot of allergic reactions. And then on the other side, there's people who the anxiety is so intense, it's debilitating and it's quality of life impeding, I should say. So this Goldilocks principle really talks about working towards finding that, just right, that's kind of the term I use, just right level of anxiety that allows us to stay safe, prepared, and cautious, but not over avoidant and find that it's debilitating for us and or our kids.
Yeah, I think the phrase relaxed readiness is perfect. I mean, it really captures
ready to act.
You're ready. You're
constantly
equipped.
avoiding. Right.
Yeah, but you don't need to be in a state of stress and anxiety to be ready. You can be relaxed and be ready.
Right. And that goes back to that skill building, right? Yep. I talk a lot in the chapter, the developmental parenting goals chapter, about that, about how we have to be mindful. And a lot of times we're not. If we're just focused on that control and keeping our child safe and listening to what our anxiety says we need to do that, we're going to potentially and often forget that we have to help them build these skills. And that comes through conversations, that comes through modeling how to navigate life with food allergies, that comes through stepping outside of comfort zones for us and for them, that comes from conversations. A lot of parents will avoid having conversations about food allergies and anaphylaxis, right? But as they're getting older, we need to be having more conversations. And as I say in the book, we need to actually kind of be talking and educating more as they get older, not just doing a lot in the very beginning so that they know what their allergen is and they could say, I have a food allergy, and then just sort of going into autopilot or controlling things. We need to keep educating and skill building so that we and them, our children, can find that relaxed readiness approach to living life with food allergies.
So let's take a few minutes just to touch on each developmental stage briefly, kind of highlighting what maybe is most important in terms of skill building and what parents could focus on. So for the toddler preschool age range, some parents may be like, there's nothing. They're too little. They're too young. But there's actually quite a bit to do at that age, right? That helps keep them safe.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. Like, they're so little, they don't know. From the very beginning, we can be, as parents, narrating and verbalizing things so that they're picking up even before they're able to speak, right? If we know about their allergens. So by the time they're toddler preschool age, not only do we want them to be able to identify their allergen, we want them to be able to say it. We want them to be able to, I would say, know what an epinephrine autoinjector device is so that they're not afraid with it, afraid if we have to use it, play with it with stuffed animals, make believe, things like that. All age appropriate and developmentally appropriate ways of approaching it. But I would argue that if we wait until they're older to start just basics, very basics and very confident. Yep, we have a food allergy.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be scary.
It shouldn't be scary. Right. It shouldn't be scary because we don't want, we may still feel afraid. That's the whole, this is the hard part. We may still feel very anxious and afraid, but when we are discussing with them and teaching them, we need to come across as empowered and confident as much as possible so that they learn that, we can do this life with a food allergy. And these are the things that we say, no, do, practice to help keep ourselves safe. At that age in our house, if we have their allergens present, you can do basic things like have green stickers, red stickers, or their name on foods that help them visually identify that it's safe for them or not safe for them, right? So yes, even at that age, there are things which I cover in the book that we can be talking about and educating them about from that early age. And I would say we need to, because every age and stage builds on those skills and education.
Right. And the younger they feel that confidence and that calm, the better for their trajectory. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're preparing our kids to keep themselves safe. So it's not all on us, in the sense that if they know how to vocalize, I can't eat that. That's not safe food for me, even when they're 4 years old. Mm-hmm. Not that we're counting on them to do that or placing that responsibility on them. That's
still
different.
There,
yeah.
And there's parents about that. Absolutely. Yeah.
But to encourage them to take the lead and get confident around that at that young age is really, really critical. And I worked with kids with all kinds of medical conditions and face this with these younger kids, parents thinking, oh, they don't need to know. Well, they do know. They know that something's different about their body. They know they have to go to the doctor. They know their parents seem stressed and scared. Yeah. So having these conversations is actually quite healing and healthy.
It's healthy, it's important, and it sets the narrative for them
Yes.
about them and their diagnosis and how they navigate life with it.
Yep. And I've seen kids in my office who are 12, that really tough age, who haven't told any of their friends.
Yeah.
Because there's a sense of embarrassment. And it's very heartbreaking, and it doesn't keep them safe because they're less likely to speak up if there's an allergen in their social environment. And I'm just bringing that up as an example because these are kind of the long term, when they're 3 and 4, we're not really thinking about when they're 12 and 13, but it's all connected.
And that's what I really highlight, particularly in that chapter of the book, is that I don't want parents to be totally focused on the future to the point where now we're completely anxious, anticipating all these things that are coming in their lives when they're 2 years old. That's not good either. However, we have to be mindful of we're building something here. And we have to stay mindful of that through our own anxiety and overwhelm, through the different developmental milestones, through all the ages and stages, because that's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. And if we were to take the food allergy or whatever health diagnosis, mental health diagnosis out of the equation, we would probably have an easier time thinking about that.
Right.
Sometimes maybe not, but okay, at this age, they're going off to kindergarten and that's hard for them. And that's hard, but okay, you can do it. And, I know this is skill building. But then when we add those layers on, those diagnoses, it can hurt our hearts so much as a parent to see them suffer. And that's what we may interpret that as suffering when actually it's not suffering. It's just them living with their diagnosis.
Right. We're imposing.
Right. We're imposing the meaning of suffering because we don't want to, cause more suffering again, particularly if we feel guilty about the diagnosis to begin with and think we had something to do with it.
Right.
Which is not the case usually. We're going to try and shield them from all of that pain and what we deem suffering. And so we're going to, usually at that point, we're getting in the way of their development because we're keeping them from conversations and skill building and experiences that are important for them to have as children, period.
Right. Yeah. So with that said, let's transition to that middle childhood stage. So we're talking school age before adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
What are kind of the main things for parents to be thinking about at this stage?
So, this is really when I start to hear parents talking about the social aspect becoming more important, that upper elementary school age, middle school age, where some of these trickier experiences of, how do we tell our friends? How do we self-advocate? So one of the skills we're going to want to help our kids build during that age and stage is self-advocating. And again, we're building all of these things in every stage.
Yep.
It's just how and the ways in which we do it are different in each stage because they're developmentally different in each stage. So, with those older elementary kiddos, they still may be willing to role play and to read their stories about social situations. And so how to self-advocate and practice. With the older, cool tweens that are like, I'm too cool for you, mom, dad, you can, for self-advocating, ask questions, critical thinking questions. If you're in this situation, what would you do?
Have them think about it.
Have them think about it. One of the key things I like to encourage, it's an easy, practical shift, but so important to help our kids start to take ownership over things when they're old enough to do so, is when we're leaving the house. Typically, parents grab the epi bag or the med kit or whatever, and it's just a habit. Well, we want them to carry it, even if they're not at the age where they're going to self-carry.
Yep.
We want them to be the one to say, we need to take it, to remember to take it, so that it becomes a habit. By the time they're a teenager and adult, they're self-carrying and they're remembering to pick it up before they leave the house. So we can, instead of saying things like, did you grab your epi? Did you grab your epinephrine? You can say, what is it you need to grab before we leave the house?
Right. It's a cue rather than a directive.
It's a cue rather than a directive. If we're constantly telling them to grab their medicine bag or their epinephrine auto-injectors or devices, they're not developing the skill to remember it themselves, to think through, to grab it, and to do that without us.
Yeah, and I think depending on the child's maturity and skills during this stage they can start doing some of their own allergy self-care.
Mhm.
Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's empowering too. And then it's more established as they go into adolescence rather than trying to start that in adolescence, which we're going to get to next.
Yeah.
Is usually the time where some of this falls apart because they're in their rebel stage and they don't.
Yeah. We want to kind of get a good solid foundation for a lot of this before we hit that. And I will say the pandemic sort of made it hard for a lot of people because there weren't a lot of opportunities to practice these skills outside of the house. So that was unfortunate. But yes, as much as possible, if we can have some solid foundations to build upon heading into the teen, adolescent, and young adult years, that's preferred.
All right. So let's talk about parenting teens with food allergies. I think parents have a reason to be nervous about this stage. And you bring up how adolescence and young adulthood is when fatal anaphylaxis is most likely to occur. So again, not a high rate. I don't want to freak people out.
Still very low rate, yeah.
But in terms of the rates of risk and likelihood, it's a little higher, right?
Yes.
So what do you want parents of teens to be thinking about?
So of course they're going to be thinking about that.
Yes.
And it's understandable, right? That's our biggest fear. And our mind pairs that with, we can't let them make mistakes because mistakes will equal bad and potentially death, right?
Yeah.
So I want them to be mindful of, if we want our kids to be able to keep themselves safe with food allergies, they've got to practice these skills while they're still with us. Not only does it help them learn the skills to keep themselves safe, it helps us trust that they know how to keep themselves safe. And that trust helps us back off little by little as we're going from, being more of a hands-on, guide to a coach or eventually a spectator of how they manage their food allergies. But without that piece of them doing it, which may include some mistakes, again, not every mistake is catastrophic and fatal.
In fact, it's almost necessary for learning.
Exactly. That's how we learn, unfortunately.
And remember how important it is. I'm teaching I know you've already done this. You have older kids, but I am teaching my oldest, who's 15, how to drive.
Yeah.
And it is the most terrifying experience. And it's such a metaphor, though, for parenting because I can't have complete control over what she's doing behind the wheel, even if I'm sitting there.
Right. We don't have those cars that allow us to do that. Yeah.
When I say something, she sometimes is reactive. And so that captures this parent-child dynamic that can happen, right? And C, I am worried about our safety in the car, right?
Yeah.
So this is I feel like I have very legitimate reasons to be correcting her. But with teenagers, and I'll pull this back to food allergy anxiety,
similar.
The risk of our overprotectiveness is that they will push it to we call it like psychological reactance, right? They will do the opposite of what you're pushing because they're feeling so controlled by you. So if you are really nagging and pushing and controlling their food allergy management, they may go to the extreme of, well, I'm not even going to take my epi anywhere I go.
Right. To show that they have control over things too. And they'll tune you out. And also, again, we go back to the messaging. The underlying message they may be taking away is my parents don't trust me to make choices.
Exactly.
Or to keep myself safe. And in some instances, that's the reality of what we're seeing with risk-taking behavior, right?
Yeah.
And we do have reason to be concerned about our child's choices. But again, lecturing, nagging, whether it's food allergies or otherwise, in this stage of development is really not successful. It's not helpful. And so we have to help our mind go back to focusing and being mindful of what is the goal. I always like to tell parents, think about what your goal is in this age and stage, or when they're in that grade or whatever. Right. It's to help them learn X, Y, and Z. It's to help them develop this skill, that skill, whatever, so that when they become a teenager, become a young adult, they can keep themselves safe. Okay, well, how do I do that? Well, I've got to let them practice. Okay, well, how do I get myself there? We work backwards, right? Like, how do I unhook from my anxiety enough to allow that to happen? What do I need? What information do I need? What do I need to practice? What coping strategies do I need? And this is a great example, that culmination of, okay, they need to practice because they're going to college or to work or living on their own after, a couple of years from now.
Yeah, it comes quickly, as you
It
can
comes
attest.
quickly. I've got one in college
quickly.
right now, and I've got another one who's going to leave me probably in 2 years. I'm like,
no, time accelerates as they.
it is. That is. Today's our 20th. My husband and mine's 20th anniversary. So like, it's like all hitting. I'm like, driving, college, 20 years. What happened?
What is happening, right?
Not to panic, parents listening. The days go slow, the years go fast. That's totally true. And I don't want you panicking about like, oh my God, high school when they're 2 years old.
Right.
But being mindful that we are building skills.
Yep.
And that is going to be uncomfortable. And we are going to have to learn to do hard things, step out of comfort zones to do that.
Yeah. So this is perfect because I'm thinking as you're talking how, and this has been true from my experience with teaching driving, we have to be uncomfortable. Like there's no way to do this with teenagers and help nurture their skill development without our own unease that they could do something risky. And it's just the nature of the adolescent beast, right? So one thing I want to make sure we talk about is what you call the anxiety autopilot path. And I love that phrase because, and we've been talking about this whole hour, but this understandable shift into kind of being in anxiety autopilot as a food allergy parent because that feels like the way to keep your kids safe. Yeah. So I just want to give a shout out that you present a lot of anxiety management strategies for food allergy parents based in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is the approach beloved by all of us here at Psychologists Off the Clock. But really quickly, in your clinical practice, what have you seen are the most impactful of these strategies for food allergy parents?
So it's more a concept or concepts that I like to sort of teach and then help them practice. And one of them, I refer to this as one of the F words of therapy. And people are always like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, flexibility, of course, right? We can use the other F word, but flexibility. Flexibility. And that seems counterintuitive to allergy parenting when we're really focused on control and safety and lowering risk, right? It's like, how do we be flexible while also being safe? And that takes practice. And what helps us do that is perspective shifting too. I mean, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of processes and concepts that help us do that. But another one is perspective shifting. And so it is shifting, like what we've talked about this whole time of allergy parenting, the drive internally maybe to stay on this anxiety autopilot path where we are like, okay, that intense anxiety, that's what's going to keep our child safe, right? Caveman times. We just have to look for threats and keep them safe. But we have to shift that perspective to, yes, include safety, influencing outcomes, controlling what we can control, and then also working in all this other stuff we've been talking about, right? Developmental milestones, unhooking and getting out of these parenting traps, which drive us off course and further into that anxiety autopilot path. So the perspective shifting, specifically, thinking things like one strategy for that we often talk about is if you're going to focus on worst case outcome, also allow your mind to think about best case outcome and most likely outcome, right? So let's just allow ourselves to have more than one thought, which is usually the worst case thought. And that helps us act more flexibly, safely, but flexibly, which allows our child growth and development, which allows us better relationships with our kids, our partners. I mean, it's all intertwined.
Great place to end, Tamara. Thank you so much. There's so much in this book that truly fills an unmet need for allergy parents. And there are so many resources out there educating parents about food allergies, but you have created a guide for parents to actually manage their emotions about raising kids with food allergies. So I know this has been a passion of yours for many years. So a huge congratulations on seeing your dream of a book become a reality.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So Tamara, thank you for your time today. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
My resource website is foodallergycounselor.com. That's also the handle I use on social media at Food Allergy Counselor. I have a separate private practice website, which is tamarahubbardlcpc.com for those in Illinois and Florida. But yeah, Food Allergy Counselor is where articles, worksheets are. I used to have a podcast too, so old episodes of that and more about my book.
And where can people buy your book?
Well, they can buy it on Johns Hopkins website. So that's my publisher. They can buy it at Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and audiobook is also. So it'll be paperback, hard copy, or hardcover, ebook, and audiobook.
Congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.